Hi everyone, Scott Davenport here, and in this ON1 workflow video, we're going to go through the start to finish processing on this scene here of a pagoda in the Wakayama prefecture of Japan. A beautiful waterfall, that's Nachi Falls in the background. It's pretty obvious why this temple and pagoda was built here. It's a gorgeous place. And this photo is going to take some time, but I think the scene demands that. This is a pretty just wonderfully beautiful place, and I need to spend the time with the photos. So if you are going to watch this from start to finish, grab yourself a coffee or something to drink, sit back, and let's get started. So the very first thing I'm doing is a quick image assessment and kind of just looking around the scene and what do I want to do. Certainly want to make the colors of the pagoda stand out more. Get some of the depth that's going on with these trees here. There's a bunch of distracting elements along the bottom edge and a couple of spaces here. The sky's washed out. I was dealt a pretty poor hand with the weather that day, but I will put this in the wind column because it stopped raining. I was able to actually get some photos without spots all over the lens. So with that in mind, let's grab our crop tool first. And I'll keep the ratio original and just drag up from the bottom so that I can get rid of many, but not all, of those distracting elements. I want to stop right about there. I don't want to lose too much of the staircase, but the handful of other folks that were out there that day, they're not really adding to the scene. This is all about the pagoda. Let's rotate as well, and I'm watching the center of the pagoda, the spire coming out of the top, to make sure that is pointing straight up. That looks good. So I'll apply those changes. Next, let's get rid of a few of these distracting elements. So we still got a tiny bit of these bushes at the bottom here. And this will be a great job for the clone tool. So I'll grab the clone tool, option click to take a sample, or alt if you're on a Windows machine, and just paint through there. And that took care of that one. Great. Drag our navigator over to the stairwell. I'm going to come back to this guy in a minute. Let's take care of another option click right here to take care of that little distracting element. And there was some space right over here, just a little tiny bit, that little bits of white that are shining through there. I think that might have been another building in the background. All right, let's take a look at this really quickly, make sure I've got all the major distractions taken care of. That looks good. Instantly I did a Command or Control 0 to fit back to the screen. All right, let's go back in at 100%, and actually I'm going to hit the Command or Control plus key 2 times. So this is very big and it's going to get grainy. But that way I can see exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to use the clone tool to kind of recreate this stairwell. So thankfully I have a repeating pattern that's going all the way down there, and if I can fill that pattern in, I can replace what's like I don't know, and some other type of statue or lantern or something that was in the front, but it's interrupting this flow here, and it's not really adding to my photo as a whole. So again, this will be great for the clone tool because I have these repeating patterns in the background. So let me hold my option key down, and I'm going to choose kind of a spot right around where the stair meets this guardrail, for lack of a better term. And so now I've got this multi-tiered stair, and I can just position it and line it up. Click, and I'm holding down, and I'm kind of painting this into that stairwell area. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to do this smaller pieces at a time. A lot of times with the clone, when you have a repeating pattern, it looks repeating to our eyes, but then when you get in really close and start looking at the fact that it's not perfectly geometrical, because different stairs have slightly different characteristics, or the angle that you were at when you took the photo. Some of these older structures, things fade over time, and certain stairs take more of a beating than others. So all of those factor in. That looks pretty good, and I got this little bit of railing to fix up here. Bracket keys to increase the brush. I'll sample right along the edge of that shadow versus highlight area, and then drag that down a little bit, check the work, maybe one more drop right there. Cool, that's looking great. All right, let me zoom back out. First at 100%. That looks very good. It looks very smooth, and you wouldn't have known if that was covered by some other lantern before I did that work. Excellent. All right, so with the retouches taken care of, it's time to move into basic development and then adding some style. So let's start off with our tone and color. Bring up the histogram view here as well. So need a little bit of a nudge on the white side of things. Otherwise, the distribution is looking pretty good. There is a lot of shadow and a lot of highlight. There's not very much going on in the midtones, kind of to be expected on a day like this. So let's start with checking out the white point. I'm going to start nudging that up until I see the histogram kind of a butt up against the edge there. I'm going to press the J key and I'm holding it down so I can start to see the clipping, and there, sure enough, it's coming in. Let's back that off, and I'm going to back it off actually quite a bit. I don't want to go too bright with that sky. I mean, the sky wasn't white, it was gray. Something around there looks good. For the same thing for the black point, I'll click and start dragging the slider and pressing the J key, and I'll start to see the clipping. Yep, doorway of the pagoda and some of the deeper brush there. And it looks around -5. I've removed all the clipping. I'm going to inch that up just a little bit because I tend to darken photos as I add different filters. So I'll account for that here now. Now I want to even out the exposure a little more. Just to get kind of, it'll be a little bit flat looking, but that's just the beginnings here. We're just getting started really. So I'm going to open up these shadows so I can see all sorts of things, what's going on in that pagoda. You can see the rocks behind the waterfall. I'll start taking the highlights down, bring some of that, what little texture there is in the sky back. There's not much there, but little bits of hints of clouds here in the sky. We'll get those. And also add some basic contrast for the scene. I'll go light-handed on contrast because I know I'm going to go into effects and start working with dynamic contrast, one of my favorite filters. And let's see here. Last thing, I'll quickly take a look at what we have for white balance. And I actually don't like what happened there. I prefer it as shot. It was cooler, but I'm going to use different tools. I think I'm going to use colors to kind of take care of bringing some of the life back into this scene as opposed to just warming it up. That did feel a little bit artificial. All right, with that, I think I'm good with my basics here, and now let's move into effects to get some of the style going. So I'll hit the effects module. I'm going to close up the histogram so we have more space on the screen to see all these different filters, and I will start with dynamic contrast. Now that is looking really cool already. I am going to add some of the smalls to get the tinier leaves and the foliage visible. And I'm already thinking ahead to one of the other things I'll likely do with this photo is adding some type of a glow look to the trees itself. So right now, things are going to look a little crunchy. And that's not going to be the final place where things end up. I think I won't touch large, I'll leave medium where it is. So this looks a little bit harsh, especially on the trees. I like what's happening with the pagoda and the stairs. Those are popping out nicely. But I know I'm going to be doing something with softening these trees later. One thing I don't want to do this, I don't want this dynamic contrast up in the sky here, at least not at full strength. So I'm going to grab the masking brush, and let's get the opacity of the brush. Actually, let's start with half. And I'll use the perfect brush. Turn that on. Paint out's already set. I don't need that big of a feather, like that. And I'm just now going to click and drag kind of through the white areas of the scene. And as long as I keep the center of my brush over the bright sky, it won't take any of the contrast away from the tree line. I press the O key, we can see how nice of a job the perfect brush is doing. I will have to sweep through those clouds there, make sure I get all that, of protecting the greens there. And I'll press, let's get in down in there, little spot right over there. And this doesn't have to be perfect. I want to take the edge off the contrast up there. I don't want to do it fully, as I'll run the risk of introducing some artifacts, some halos up there. All right, that is looking pretty good. Let's move on to color. Add a color enhancer, and I'm going to reach for foliage right away because I want those greens to come out. That's already looking much, much better, much richer. Okay, now, let's take a look at what this preset did, or style I should say, the foliage, it increased saturation there. It did the shifting of the hue toward green for yellow, and I think I'm going to play with the brightness here a little bit and see what that's going to do for me. Just to brighten up the trees a tiny bit. Yeah, I like that. And actually now I want to revisit those greens too and maybe play with the brightness on that as well. But these are subtle changes. I'm honestly not sure how much of that will get compressed away by the magic of internet delivered video. But that's going to be pretty good. And then oranges and reds, make sure those are zeroed out. I'll do those differently later on if I need to boost up the oranges in the pagoda itself. All right, let's check a quick before and after on the color for the foliage. Much nicer. Yes, okay, that's looking good. While we're looking at trees, let's go ahead and add a glow. I mentioned I was going to be adding some type of glow filter or softening to get some ambiance in those trees. So let's go ahead and get it done right now. Let's see. Start with, I guess normal is good. And then let's play with the strength here. That's looking okay, although overall it's a bit strong. So let me back off the opacity. And I'm just watching the preview as I'm moving the slider back and forth, because it's I probably say this in every video I make. The number doesn't matter. You know, wherever I end up, it's nothing magical. All right, I end up at 59. There's nothing magical about the number 59. It's just that that's what looks good for this particular scene. Now the thing is, I don't want this this glow on the pagoda, because glow is it's kind of, you know, going against contrast. You know, contrast crispens things up and gives us the illusion of sharper edges, where glow does the opposite. So I want to mask this away from the pagoda. So whoops, let's get the menu out of the way. We'll bring the opacity of our brush all the way up, and you know, on second thought, I think I will use that perfect brush. So I'm going to do Command or Control R, and then just start to paint through the pagoda so that I can remove the glow from the pagoda. I'll press the O key. We can see what's going on here. This is getting pretty well filled in all the way down through here. Certainly down the stairs, railings around here. I can do some single clicks in and around these orange bits. So you can see that's really targeting the pagoda and leaving the foliage largely alone. Make sure I get everything good there. What about the rocks in the back? Let's keep the rocks kind of sharp too. Doing some single clicks through here and letting the perfect brush do the detection for me. And so, you know, you kind of get an idea of what's going on with my hands. I've got one hand hovering over the keyboard, hitting the O key on and off as I'm brushing through. And then my other hand is on my input device, happens to be just a trackpad, so that I can keep my eyes on the screen and not on, you know, bouncing back and forth between menus and so forth. So learning your keyboard shortcuts for masking is a good thing to learn. It's really worth the effort to know a handful of keys. O key to turn on and off the masking view, and the bracket keys to make your brush larger and smaller. All right, that looking pretty good. Let's go with that. All right, next up, I mentioned that weather wasn't incredibly cooperative. We're gonna help nature out a little bit today, and we're gonna add some sunshine. So we're gonna give the illusion that some sunshine was being added to this scene. A little strong, so let's back this off. And again, I'm gonna start watching the preview and not so much the slider to see where I ended up. And you know, if you're having trouble when you're working with this and sliding back and forth, you can also just click. If you can, you'll get into a rhythm of being able to move your device back and forth to the right and to the left and do larger clicks and zero in on something that looks pretty good to you. I'm ending up around 67. That's feeling pretty good for that scene there. That's before and after. It's washing out the cloud up in the sky a little bit. So let me grab my brush. And I'll take this at, actually I'll save myself the step. I did this with dynamic contrast. Let me copy that mask, come back up to sunshine, and I'll paste that same mask right down. So that's going to take some of that sunshine away from the sky. And so now before and after. I'm getting nicer richness in the body of the scene, but I'm not losing this one little bit of sky interest that I have there. I want to try to hold on to that as much as I can. All right, I'm going to return to color again. I'm looking at the pagoda now, and I want to get more pop in that orange there. I'm going to add another color enhancer. Now, since this scene is largely green, a little bit of I'll call it blue in the sky, although it's really more of a gray, I can try the desert preset, and that's really just going to end up popping the pagoda, like before and after. I don't have to do anything else. I have to do no masking. It's really, desert is targeting blues. There aren't any blues to speak of in this scene. Yellows it's doing a little bit of work with, but it's the oranges and reds that really get shifted. And orange and red is what this pagoda is. And so the minor shift that's happening in happening in yellow, that's really not playing too poorly with this scene, before and after. I'm watching the trees, and they're staying in check. I'm seeing a little bit of brightness here, but not enough to make me want to break out the masking brush and start doing any more work on it. I like what I'm seeing with this straight out with just desert. One other color change we can make is that yellow spire, at least yellowish. There's some gold parts on that. I want to press the fall preset here, fall style. Now I'm only paying attention to this spire. It's doing a lot of things with the rest of the scene that I do not like, right? It's, the pagoda is getting too hot. The trees are getting touched. I'm really just watching that spire, and I like what it's doing there. So let's invert the mask. And so now this color enhancer with the fall style is being applied nowhere. We'll get our brush. We'll switch it to paint in mode. We'll turn on the perfect brush. And now I'm just going to target these tiny flecks of gold that are in here. And as long as I keep the center of my brush on that pagoda, I'm going to do O key here. You can see I'm just making sure I pick up those little circles, those little discs that are part of the spire here on the top. And that's just going to give a little bit of an accent to that gold there. So before and after. A subtle one, but I like that because it is making sure that the entirety of the pagoda is standing out against that green backdrop. All right, one more thing for color. Most of this scene looks great, and then we have this hunk of nothing up in the sky here. We're going to try to nudge Mother Nature in the right direction. And so I've added a photo filter. The default is this this deep blue, and what it's doing to the sky isn't all that bad. I think I want to tidy it up a little bit, and potentially choose something a little bit less blue, maybe somewhere in that range. That's already a less amount. The clean shadows looks good. Maybe a little more blue. I'm really just watching the sky now. I know this is affecting the entire scene, but I only want it in the sky. That's okay. I'm going to play with the opacity too, because I want to have that blend in nicely. I don't want to do an over the top, add a bunch of blue in the sky, because it just won't look. It won't look right. It won't look natural. Let's see. Somewhere in this arena is pretty good, and I only want to, let's see, I don't want to have let me say the cloud before and after. The cloud, I don't want this in the cloud, and I certainly don't want it in the foreground. I still have this mask here, so let me paste this mask down and invert it. So now it's removing that effect from the foreground. It's not applying it at full strength, so we're going to have to do the masking ourselves here. So we got the masking brush, opacity at 100%, make the brush size bigger. We're painting in, and we're going to paint that blue through here. This one I won't even need the masking view because I can see that blue is showing up as I paint through, right? Good, get through there. But I don't want to make the cloud blue. So perfect brush is still on, and I press the X key. That's switching the mode, paint in versus paint out. If I do single clicks here, what is that doing for me? That's too strong. Let's take our opacity of our brush down, and let's try just kind of sweeping through here to see how well is the edge detection working. That's going to be a tough one. Let's try a different approach. We can try some work with our protection sliders. Protect all the shadows. I certainly don't want shadows affected at all. And that's actually going to help out with the foreground as well. And skin, this is basically mid-tone, so let's pop that about halfway up, before and after. Better, one other thing we can do with the perfect brush is we can tighten up the color threshold all the way down to 1. So this tells the brush, be really, really particular about what you consider a matching color. So let's try one more time with this area. And I'm going to use the Command or Control key and lock the color sampling. And let's see what this does. How well is that working? So. I'm gonna invest the time in this one and see if we can make it work out. I'm gonna hit the X key, reverse that back in, and start to paint in. Again, I'm using that tight color threshold to keep the brush from considering too many things a color match. And I'm also using the Command or the Control key to lock the color sample. Normally, the perfect brush will continually sample the color that's underneath it. If I use the Command or Control key before I click to make that first sample, the brush will sample once until I let go of the key. And so you can pick a particular color that you want, lock on it with the Command or Control key, and then brush through a whole bunch of the scene. Let's take a look at the mask we've got going on here. I think I'll tidy this up out here a little bit. And notice that it's varying shades of gray. This is because I have an opacity of the brush at half strength, right? So each brush stroke is adding or removing, depending on paint in or paint out, half of the effect. And that's looking all right. Let me do a quick before and after to make sure it doesn't look too unnatural. The last thing I'll do, turn off the perfect brush. I'm going to take the opacity really low, just about 10 or so, and O key. And this is just to kind of smooth around some of the edges there. Get that feather up really far too, just to take a bit of the transition edge off on some of those spots, and maybe even a couple of tiny clicks inside the cloud as well. All right. Okay, I'm going to work with that. I'm going to say that's okay. And now the next thing to do is going to be like the finer tune adjustments. These are going to be little finishing touches. I'm going to do these local adjustments where these will add up to become a series of small things that will add up to a nice result. So let's go over into local adjustments. All right, so the first local adjustment, I've still got the sky on my mind. And so let's do an experiment of slightly cooling the sky. Take the temperature down. Let's just pre-stage the brush, or right around there is as good as any place. And we'll choose our local adjustable gradient, drop it on the scene here, and see what that does for us, if anything, before and after. Ooh, wow, that is subtle. Let's also nudge the exposure down a little bit. All right, that's starting to come into something noticeable. Let's keep going down really far here. That's probably too far. Nudge that back up, somewhere around there. Feather this out. And I do want to not have the darkening of these hills here. So let's grab the adjustment brush. And we'll get that feather back up. Raise the opacity, maybe around, pretty strong, maybe 80%. Perfect brush. We're going to paint out this effect so that we're not having that darkening happening on the hills or the pagoda or anything else. It would only be to the sky. There'll be a little bit of a fade because we want that. We want it to be, within the realm of natural looking. And I press the O key, you're going to see that, there's this softer, charcoalish gray that is in these hills rising up. That's the hillside, and we're taking a little bit of that color temperature, and negative exposure, but not at full strength. Make sure I got my hillside painted there pretty well, and that should be all right. All right, cool. All right, next local adjustment. I'm now looking at the waterfall, and I want the waterfall to be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to stage my brush here, add a little bit of exposure. Brush, we're going to paint in. I do not need the perfect brush. Let's go ahead and do 100%. Now I'm going to do a lazy brush stroke here, using the shift bracket keys to adjust the feather. So just a lazy brush stroke up and down the waterfall. Okay, so that's what the brush looks like. Very, very messy. And you can see before and after. Now the waterfall is getting a nice pop, but those rocks around it are as well. Well, instead of doing some intricate masking, I'm going to take advantage of the blending options, and I'm just going to apply this to the highlights. So apply to the highlights, and now start working with a range. And you can see the waterfall gets very bright, the waterfall gets nothing at all, and just start to find a good spot. And right around there is looking pretty all right. And with this is a beautiful thing about blending options. Use them along with your masks. You can mask something in kind of a lazy fashion, and then fine tune it using these protection sliders or the apply to sliders, and save yourself some difficult masking. Matter of fact, let's keep working in that same area. Add a third adjustment here, and for this one I want to darken the rocks that are on either side of the waterfall. So let's pre-stage our brush. Let's just start with half of a exposure, and maybe even add a little more contrast, maybe a little bit of detail. I'll revisit those sliders in a minute. And I'm gonna brush this in around here. You can see that's very dark, and we'll fine tune that later. For this area, I will turn on the perfect brush. I don't want to darken the pagoda. I just want the rocks around it, around the waterfall, I should say. Okay, now let's fine tune some things here. That exposure is too dark for sure. Let's bring that back up, and a little bit of contrast, detail, tiny bit. Now my brush strokes are messy and covering, especially in this area, it's covering a lot of the foliage. I don't want those things to be affected, so I'm going to go in those blending options. I'm just going to apply this in neutrals. The rocks are neutral colored, right? The foliage is very vibrant, and so the end result is that the increase in detail and contrast and the little darkening that's going on there is only touching those rocks in the cliff face. And let's use that same idea, that same approach, to get a little more pop in the pagoda itself. The pagoda is largely red, right? Orange red. So let's pre-stage a local adjustment. We'll add a little contrast, and let me pull the detail up really far just so I can see what's going on with it. I mean, not just crank it up to 100. That's going to be way too much, but that way I can see what's happening. A little bit of contrast, and we'll paint over the pagoda area. You can see that's garish, but at least we can make sure we're covering all of the areas of the pagoda we need to. All right, now let's rein that in. Okay, first off, detail way too much. Let's get that somewhere around there. And then we'll use apply to just reds. So that's going to protect the rocks that are in the background and the greens, of course. And then I can play with the range to find out, well, this is really more orange than red. And so I have to adjust the range to tell ON1, this is what I want you to consider a red. And in this case, range of 70 is looking pretty good. So before and after. That's a nice, that's a subtle one. Wow. Let's see, any more detail on that? Maybe a little bit more. Now that I've tailored that protection slider, and a slight bit more contrast. There's a little bit of a pop. This I mentioned, this is going to be a series of small things that ultimately add up to something nice. All right, next. I just want to take the edge off of these brighter trees. I want the eyes drawn into that pagoda. So, all right, let's just start with that exposure. We can see where that line's going to get drawn. And feather that out a little bit. Kind of angle that in there. Let's bring this exposure slider up to something that's not super dark. Before and after. Let me rotate that a little bit more so I'm not affecting the sky per se. I can set my pivot point down here and get my angle right. So this main circle here, when you position the middle of it, it's really it's your pivot point. That helps when you're trying to get one of these angles right. If you position that to a different spot, you know, different place to center around from. All right, that looks cool. Let me double check that before and after. And actually I may want to brighten up this side a little bit too. So let's go ahead and add a, I'm still eyeing this one here. Let me look at the mask. All right, it's not bad. I think I want to paint it in a little bit more at partial strength, just over this tree as well, to blend that in a little more smoothly. That looks better. All right, good. Another adjustment, since I'm thinking about darkening and brightening corners, let's drop another one on here. And I'm thinking about this side of the scene, but bringing up the exposure ever so slightly, just to even it out, so that it felt a little bit dingy over there. So let's do that. But I certainly don't want to have it in the sky. We spent quite a bit of time in the sky to make that work. So let's go ahead, paint out, perfect brush. I can make the brush, whoops, wrong keystroke. That was the O key. Make the brush nice and big. Now I want my O, and I can paint that away from the sky. Great, all right. I think the finishing touch is going to be returning to effects and adding a vignette. And I really want to spotlight this pagoda. So the first thing I'll do is take the feather down, take the brightness down, just so I can see the edge of the vignette. And really, I do want to kind of spotlight this thing. Bring the size down, somewhere around here is looking pretty good. This crosshairs tool, now this is really useful because I can recenter the vignette, and I'm clicking and dragging, and I want this, you know, right over the pagoda. This is the star of this photo. Okay, with the position set, size looks pretty good. I'll take that feather all the way back up, and then finally just adjust the brightness so that I certainly don't want it to be that dark. Maybe something around there, and even that's feeling a little bit too dark. That sky is getting kind of dingy, so I'll take the opacity of this this vignette somewhere around there. Looks good before and after. All right, that's a nice one. Let me even maybe tighten that up a tiny little bit. And I think I will take a little more of that vignette off the sky. The sky's gotten a little bit dingy. So let's grab the brush. Let's see, 50%. Or 53-ish, that's fine. Paint out, perfect brush is turned on, and just take that that vignette away from the sky. And it's all right if our eyes get drawn up in there, up to the top of the scene, to kind of go up to the heavens, as it were. All right, great. All right, so this one's I think we're all done. So let's recap what we did here. We started with, you know, a pretty flat, pretty basic photo. Nice composition, had some distracting elements in it. Removed the distractions and straightened up the scene, you know, with some cropping and a bit of clone and stamp. Basic settings and develop. Set the overall exposure and tone for the scene, and decided not to do anything with color temperature. Kept it on the little cool side. Added a bunch of filters and effects to bring out color, to bring out some detail, add a little bit of ambiance and glow to the foliage. Used several different local adjustments to shape the photo, to get a little bit more play between light and shadow, and again, reinforce the subject of the pagoda, and finished it off with a vignette. Well, I'm Scott Davenport, and if you've stuck with me this long, thanks very much for watching this entire video, and I hope you have enjoyed it.